I played The Elder Scrolls Online to see if it was worth playing in 2025. Is it as good as the main Elder Scrolls games? Should you try it? What would Skyrim be like if it was an MMO? Not this, that's not what this is. Here is what I found out.
What the fuck? What the fuck?
The Elder Scrolls Online is a game developed by ZeniMax Online Studios. It takes place in Bethesda's Elder Scrolls universe. The franchise has had some of gaming's most famous and infamous releases. You probably remember a lot of these titles from this famous franchise, like Oblivion, the one with the NPC dialogue memes, Daggerfall if you're in your mid-70s, and of course their most popular, most recent, but somehow still ancient release, Skyrim, the one that everyone pretends wasn't their first Elder Scrolls game. And with such high expectations of such a successful franchise, it begs the question, does this MMO live up to the Elder Scrolls name? What's it like being able to explore Tamriel in its entirety instead of just one province like in the main games? For such a massive game, are the provinces fleshed out or just underwhelming? Well, to start off, you boot up the game and you're greeted with unique music that develops into a version of the main Elder Scrolls theme, like in the other games. And I gotta say, as an Elder Scrolls fan, this got me pretty hyped up. All of the playable races in the game belong to one of three factions: the Ebonheart Pact, the Covenant, and the Aldmir Dominion. The different factions don't stop players from being able to play together, however. Going further into the character creator, you realize that every possible way that you can make your character looks really fucking derpy, which I think is something that we as Elder Scrolls fans have grown to appreciate. The character creator is decent, and there is a butt slider. I made my character and the class I chose was the Dragon Knight, thinking it would be like a warrior, having no idea how the classes in this game actually work. Turns out, abilities you get from leveling your classes are completely independent from the abilities you get from leveling weapons. Just like in the single-player Elder Scrolls games, you can equip any item on any class, and your character's skill in using these items levels as you use them. You get a separate skill tree for your class, the weapons you use, your armor, race, and even the factions you join and do quests for give you new skill trees, adding a lot of depth to the game's character building. After researching the classes a bit more, I ended up deleting that character and went with the Warden class, which I initially thought was a bow class because it shows up with a bow in the class selection. For my character's race, I chose Nord because Skyrim and because Viking, and the reason I went with the Warden class was because it has a frost magic spec. The class concept I had in my head was the ultimate Viking, hybrid tank DPS warrior that uses frost magic, and in this game, I was able to do that. The tutorial zone starts you off as a prisoner in classic Bethesda fashion. Apparently my soul is shriveled or something, and you loot and try out some different weapons so you can decide what to use. I killed a Daedra wearing Daedric armor, and I couldn't immediately loot its Daedric armor when I was level 1. Can't loot the hammer from the table or the dead bodies. What kind of Skyrim is this? This does get better after the tutorial though, to be fair. You can, in fact, grab shit that you see laying around. Once you're done with the tutorial, you end up in your starting zone, which is different for every race, and for Nords, it was a small island off the coast of Skyrim called Bleak Rock Isle. I was greeted by a guy that looked a little too much like my character and started exploring around. Even the starting zone had a decent bit of side quests, depth, exploration, and choice in the storyline, which really made the world feel alive to me. I interacted with other players in the starting zone and did some gathering. Like any good open world game, Elder Scrolls Online gets you sidetracked quite a bit. I was told I needed to save some people who were in immediate danger, but instead I got sidetracked and did a side quest with this one guy's dog, and then I started swimming around the island looking for stuff on the glaciers. This game ignited a serious sense of exploration in me, and you better believe I walked into people's houses unannounced. Gathering in particular is an aspect of the game that deserves to be talked about. Gathering in ESO is incredibly convenient. You don't need to learn a gathering profession in order to start. You don't need to have like a pickaxe for mining in your inventory or an axe for chopping wood. You just see the item and you pick it up. Sure, your character magically pulls out a pickaxe or an axe just out of his ass out of nowhere, and some of you might find that unimmersive, but I don't really think it's a big deal. Matter of fact, I actually quite like the convenience of gathering in this game. It adds to and enhances the gameplay loop instead of disrupting it. The resources that you gather are of course later used for crafting, and the crafting system works rather similarly to previous Elder Scrolls titles as well, but more on crafting later. ESO has an action combat system, and it's a combination of using buttons on your keyboard for hitting, blocking, bashing, and dodge rolling, and keybound abilities like in a traditional MMO. Now ESO's combat system does get memed on quite a bit for not being great, and I gotta admit it does feel a little floaty. But then again, you play Elder Scrolls games, there isn't an Elder Scrolls Scrolls game that does not have floaty combat. Since you have enough skill points in the game from leveling and finding sky shards being these hidden crystal things throughout the world that give you a skill point for every 3 that you find to incentivize exploration. You end up acquiring all kinds of skills on your character, and the way that your class is defined is different from what you'll typically expect in an MMO. One of the ways that your class is defined is by what abilities you have socketed into your action bar, since you only have a few sockets and must choose carefully. This doesn't feel like a limiting factor in the game though, and I think it's a nice addition because without it, player characters would just be jacks of every single trade under Akatosh's sky. At level 15, your character unlocks the ability to have a secondary weapon and a keybind to switch between them. You also get another skill bar linked with this weapon, and you end up swapping between your different weapon types to use your different skills. Say you're a DPS dual-wielding spell sword. You got all your abilities for melee fighting socketed for your axes. Then you switch from dual-wielding axes to a staff for some range damage, and that's where you socket all your magic. Or a DPS tank hybrid like me, going in sword and shield, activating defensive, and switching to a two-handed greatsword to deal some heavy damage, switching back to sword and shield to use self-healing abilities and defend in sticky situations. The combat loop, while yeah, a bit floaty, is fun, I think, primarily because of how much freedom and customization there is, and I like the whole swapping weapons thing. The other way that your class is defined, it's defined by how you spend your attribute points. Like skill points, every time you level up, you also get attribute points that you can add to your health, magicka, or stamina. Blocking, dodging, and fighting skills cost stamina, magic skills cost magicka, and your health is your health. Abilities don't have cooldowns in this game, so running out of these resources is your only limiting factor. If your build is gonna use a lot of stamina, you need to put points in your stamina. If your build is gonna use a lot of magicka, you put points in your magicka. Some skill trees in the game, both from your class and others, have ultimate abilities. Ultimates are the only exception to the no cooldown thing, as after you use them, you need to charge them again by fighting, which isn't a timed cooldown, but you can't use them back to back like the other skills. Basically, there's a resource called Ultima, which is generated in combat and spent on using ultimates. Using skills levels them up, and after they reach a certain level, you can morph them. Basically, the game lets you upgrade the skill into a better version, but you gotta choose between 2 different upgraded versions of the skill with different effects. Then there's the questing. Look, we all know that feeling. You're on your 69th Skyrim playthrough, having a good time, maybe dabbling in some modding, but then you make it to the border of the game, the line you cannot cross. And you think to yourself, how cool would it be if I could leave and see the rest of Tamriel? Well, in ESO, you can do that. Okay, so the map is massive, but how's the quality? From what I've seen so far, pretty good. After the starting zone, I ended up in Morrowind, which is a province on Tamriel to the east of Skyrim, but it's not the same setting as the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, as that game took place on Vardenfell, a massive island in the middle of Morrowind that makes up the bulk of the province. The rest of the province of Morrowind, the part that I explored, is a thin strip of territory on the mainland curved around the island, and Vardenfell itself wasn't initially part of ESO, but was added in an expansion. Speaking of expansions, or DLCs as they are called here, they don't make old content irrelevant. Max level has always been 50, and more levels are not added with time. The world also scales to your character's level, meaning you can explore anywhere, whenever you want. You can run into all sorts of interesting stuff while exploring around this game, like Hondo Unaka.
Is that right? Well then, sounds to me like you could be one of the Undaunted.
Most of the solo world content, though, I gotta say, is it's way too easy. I would just increase the damage of almost everything in the open world. Questing around Morrowind was so fun that I ended up doing most of the side quests that I found, and all of the long quest chains. I was having so much fun doing quests, factions, dungeons, gathering, and crafting that I still haven't gotten back to the main story since I left the starting zone, and I'm not even in Morrowind anymore. I'm in Skyrim. So far, I only did a bit of exploration around the Rift, one of the zones in Skyrim, and it's really cool how it looks familiar but different. The sense of adventure is in no short supply in this game. When you consider all the land you have to explore on Tamriel, it makes it difficult to grasp just how massive this game is. The sheer scope of this game is incredibly vast, not unlike your mother. Apart from quests and the normal things you can run into, the variety of encounters also seems pretty plentiful. You can run into things like world bosses, although this is when I found out that the enemy AI is is not that great, especially when it comes to terrain, because I just cheesed him and shot at him with a staff. My character doesn't even use staffs, by the way. My damage was shit. But I slowly killed him with a staff by shooting at him from a cliff, and he just stood there and watched me. I just entered the fight, jumped off the cliff, and started blasting at him. Other random encounters are like this one thing happened where a meteor fell from the sky with some guys for me to kill and a skeleton. Once I killed them, another one fell from the sky and it had like a lich mini boss. And then something happened when I killed it. I have no idea what that was. Took a break on that spot for like a couple of minutes and 2 more meteors fell. I guess it respawned, but this time it was Daedra. So the encounter is randomized? I guess that's cool. I also noticed that the game has a day and night cycle that does not mimic real life, which means the day and nighttime switch faster, which I guess makes sense because you can turn into a vampire in this game too. ESO also has some other familiar concepts from previous Elder Scrolls titles, such as vampirism like I mentioned before, and soul gems, although there's only one kind of soul gem in this game. No petty soul gems, great soul gems, black soul gems, just soul gems. The way that classes work and all the questing and leveling can be a bit overwhelming for new players. The different effects you get from wearing light, medium, or heavy armor I also found confusing. Like in my case, I needed to combine medium and heavy armor, but how much of it should be medium? How much of it should be heavy? Different pieces of gear make up for different percentages of your stats. A chest plate is not the same as shoulders or boots. So when a guide says 5 pieces of heavy and 3 pieces of medium, what does that mean? Which pieces? Luckily, this complexity has a simple solution to it. You can install a community add-on that shows you a guide for questing, locating all your sky shards for skill points, and it's all in the game. You don't have to alt-tab to check shit. It's incredibly convenient and time-saving. I am, of course, talking about Zygor, ESO's top guide add-on that will help you figure out where to go in the massive world. And if you're a veteran player and just want to level as fast as possible, Zygor will optimize your leveling better than any other guide. It will also save you a lot of time in gaining champion points, not to mention the time that you save by having everything in the game and not having to tab out. They also have guides for World of Warcraft, and you get those and the ESO guides in the same package together. They all go together. Look, the reason why I like Zygor so much is it doesn't just offer a massive in-game advantage and quality of life, it also offers you time. Zygor is an add-on that actually respects your time, and it'll save you so much time. So do yourself a favor, click the link in the description or here on the screen, and you'll never have to fall behind in this game ever again. Now for the crafting system. The crafting system is, as formerly mentioned, reminiscent of previous Elder Scrolls games. Blacksmithing, for example, has you crafting items with iron, and as you level, you can move on to steel, go up to ebony, but the primary way you level is different. Instead of with crafting items, which does give you some XP, your primary way to level crafting skills is by deconstructing items that you find. Enchanting functions in a similar way, where you pick up runes that you find around the world, you combine 3 different runes to make an enchantment. But instead of enchanting the item directly, in ESO, you get the enchantment in your inventory and can apply it or sell it whenever you please. You can find enchantments like this being dropped by enemies or loot as well, and deconstructing these will level your enchanting skill. Dungeons in ESO are also pretty interesting because they have difficulty levels, and the storyline in the dungeon, the quests, and the enemies and bosses you fight are completely different depending on what difficulty you enter in. When I googled it, it said that most classes in ESO can solo PvE, and it mostly comes down to how well your build sustains health, magicka, and stamina. Do you have good self-healing? Are you gonna run out of magicka that you need for healing before you kill the boss? Do you have enough stamina to block consecutive attacks from multiple enemies? These are the things that it more or less comes down to. In all honesty, I'm not sure how I feel about the PvE content being soloable, as the game loses a lot of its magic because of it. I mean, I get that soloing content makes the game a lot more accessible and a lot more casual friendly. Like if you want to play the game really casually, you can just experience any of the content whenever you want. On the flip side though, having the content be killable solo makes it way less epic. And I don't think there's anything like going in a raid with 20 plus people in an MMO to defeat a foe that would otherwise be utterly impossible to beat. The content being soloable does fit with the game thematically in a way, because ESO does that thing where it makes you the super special chosen one, which can kill Satan in a 1v1, which I think is fine in some single player games, but in an MMO, you end up with 1 million super special chosen players in the world. This may be a bit of a personal preference, and I understand if you disagree, but I prefer it when the world of the MMO is the main character and not you. When you're just an adventurer here to explore it and face its perils. Sure, you may obtain great power along the way, but you're nothing compared to something like the Lich King in WoW. You're gonna need another 20 of you to to take him down. And finally, I think doing the dungeons in ESO with a group is more fun, much more fun than doing it solo, because when you do it solo, it turns into this loop of maybe block or dodge some attacks, heal yourself, hit the boss for a shred of his health, rinse repeat for what feels like forever. The fights end up being extremely drawn out, and the flaws in the game's combat really start to be painfully apparent in those drawn out fights. PvP isn't usually my preferred form of endgame MMO content, but from what I've seen so far in ESO, I prefer it. I prefer the PvP. The character customization makes PvP really interesting, as you can develop and correct your class for basically any situation you find yourself in. PvP in ESO is a mix of skill, but also cleverly developing your build for it. Interestingly enough, the general guidelines that you would follow for making a good PvP character are mostly the same as those for a character that can solo PvE. Damage mitigation, self-healing, and resource management, though I would add decent burst damage as an important thing for PvP. This game is a decade old and the content releases have been plentiful, although a bit confusing. ESO has had massive content drops like Morrowind and elsewhere, but most of its content and new land releases have been in smaller DLCs like Orsinium or the Dark Brotherhood. Okay, so how expensive is it to get all this? Well, here's how it works. The big expansion-like content releases are called chapters, and they're separate from the smaller DLCs. When you buy the base game, I think it's about 20 bucks, but it's pretty much always on sale on Steam, so you can get it for 6. When you get the base game, it comes with the first major expansion, Morrowind, for free, letting you play in Vardenfell. Right now, you can get the Gold Road collection on Steam for 20 bucks because it's on sale, and it'll give you all the major expansions. It does not, however, include smaller DLCs like the Dark Brotherhood. Those can be purchased in the in-game shop. If you buy the subscription, however, you get access to all the DLC as long as you're subbed, and this seems to be a cheaper alternative. The chapters include new storylines, massive land to explore, and new classes, while the smaller DLCs add quest lines, factions, and smaller pieces of land on the map. This is the map of the game where it was released, and this is it now. The amount of content that has been released is insane, but for the initial purchase of the game, you just get the base release and Vardenfell. If you're interested in trying the game, just get the base game, I'd say. Play it for a bit, see how much you like it, and then figure out if you want the expansions and or the monthly sub. Don't just go draining your wallet on all this extra stuff if you're not sure you're gonna play the game. The game is further monetized by a cash shop, which is mostly cosmetic, but it also has things like backspace and other quality of life stuff. The cash shop doesn't seem to be too intrusive to the game, however. If you do decide to try ESO, I'd say figure out what you want to play up front and maybe watch a YouTube video about the classes. But keep in mind, 2 of the classes came out in expansions, and you need those expansions to play that class. Elsewhere for Necromancer and Necrom to play the Arcanist. The latter of which has been praised by players for being a really fun class, and the Necromancer has his interesting quirks. Since necromancy is illegal in Tamriel, if you're seen using your abilities or doing your evil unholy death magic by the city guards, you could get arrested. Immersive. And whatever you do, if you're a first-time player, make sure you take it slow. The game would be absolute chaos if you don't. Take your time to explore and see the content, and don't just rush your leveling, as this game has a lot more zones and quests than what you need to hit max level. Most players keep questing around even after they hit level 50, just to experience the quest lines of all the zones themselves, maybe even get some cool items along the way. Now for the final verdict. Should you play ESO in 2025? Probably. If you're an Elder Scrolls fan, it might be nice for you to experience this world in a different way, but just keep in mind that this is not Skyrim Online. It's a different game. If you just want to play a good MMO, I think ESO holds its ground. The population is very healthy, people are streaming it, and the way classes work is an interesting experience. Endgame PvE, while I haven't gotten there myself, looks to be pretty fun as well. If you're a PvPer, I did some PvP, the tank DPS hybrid ended up being a pretty decent build for PvP. I think making your own classes like you can in this game is particularly fun in PvP because you can just figure out, okay, why am I dying, what can I do, and just alter your class, switch out some abilities, join a faction, get some new skills, use different items. Yeah, building your own classes and PvP is quite fun. And the PvP game modes that I tried, also really fun. There's an entire zone, by the way, Cyrodiil, that's just a massive world PvP area. So if you like PvP, there is content here. PvE, dungeons and raids, I think almost everything, or maybe actually everything, has a solo mode. So you can just, you know, a story mode, I guess it's called. So if you just want to experience the storyline, if you're one of those don't interact with anyone in MMOs types of players, this game does have solo content. But keep in mind, you probably are are gonna have to make sure you build your character in a way that's sustainable for solo content. I mean, theoretically, you could just put 0 points in your class and build your character strictly based on your weapons or your faction. I mean, the Fighter's Guild's ultimate ability lets you use the Dawnbreaker. But what, a big holy sword not your thing? Just become a vampire lord or a werewolf. Yeah, that's in this game too. The customization is crazy. If you're the kind of player that's looking for an adventure in a fantasy world, I would 100% say that ESO is a game worth giving a shot. And it's even better with the Zygor add-on. Link for that in the description.